For a generation of fans, Arsène Wenger was Arsenal. His name felt inseparable from the club. As kids, many of us even thought Arsène and Arsenal were one and the same. But when Wenger stepped away in 2018, it wasn't just the end of a manager. It was the end of an era. What followed was chaos. Emery failed, Ljungberg floundered, and Arsenal looked broken. Arsenal were desperate for a new visionary. Then came Mikel Arteta, one of Wenger's former captains. Young, untested, but armed with a clear idea of what Arsenal could become. Brick by brick, he began to rebuild, and slowly Arsenal rose again, pushing for the title, finishing runners-up in back-to-back seasons. Close enough to believe, yet still short of glory. Now the question hangs heavier than ever. Is Arteta the man to finally take Arsenal back to glory, or will his project collapse under the weight of expectation? When Arsène Wenger left, Arsenal weren't just losing a manager, they were losing their identity. For 2 decades, Wenger had been the architect of everything. The Invincibles, Champions League nights, a style of football that defined an era. But even legends grow old, and by the end, Wenger was showing the signs. The trophies slowed, the football lost its edge, and despite his best efforts, Arsenal began to drift further from the elite. By 2018, the frustration was impossible to ignore. Wenger out banners hung over the Emirates, not from rivals, but from his own fans. It was a sad ending to a glorious reign. When he finally stepped away, Arsenal weren't just saying goodbye to a manager. They were saying goodbye to the heartbeat of their club. Unai Emery was brought in to steady the ship, and at first there was hope. But his reign quickly unraveled. Confusing tactics, dressing room unrest, and humiliating defeats. The promise of a new era dissolved into frustration. By the winter of 2019, Arsenal were a team adrift. Freddie Ljungberg stepped in as caretaker, but even a club legend couldn't spark a revival. His short spell only confirmed what everyone feared. Arsenal weren't just underperforming, they were lost. This wasn't the Arsenal of Wenger. This was a giant on its knees. No leaders, no identity, no belief. The banter era wasn't just a joke online. It was reality. And out of that chaos, Arsenal turned to one of their own. A former captain with no managerial experience, but with a vision that promised to rebuild what was broken. In December 2019, Arsenal made a bold choice. They turned to Mikel Arteta, one of Wenger's former captains, but a man with no managerial experience. On paper, it looked like a gamble, yet beneath the surface, Arteta carried something more important, a vision. For years, he had been Pep Guardiola's understudy at Manchester City, learning the intricacies of positional play, pressing triggers, and tactical discipline. He was absorbing knowledge from the man many considered the greatest manager in the world. But being Pep's assistant also cast a shadow. Was Arteta destined to remain the student, or was he ready to step out and become the master? Arsenal's call gave him that chance. A broken club, desperate for identity, placed its future in his hands. But almost immediately, the world changed. Just months into his tenure, football was shut down by a global pandemic. Arteta himself tested positive for COVID-19, becoming one of the first high-profile figures in England to do so. The league came to a halt, stadiums fell silent, and when football returned, it looked nothing like the game he had been hired to lead. And Arsenal, under his watch, became a punchline. Clumsy at the back, toothless up front, the internet filled with memes about banter Arsenal. It was sad and funny at the same time. A once great club, now mocked around the world. The truth was harsh. Arteta hadn't created this mess. He had inherited it. And with a global crisis swirling around him, change was always going to take time. Yet even in the chaos, sparks began to appear. He brought discipline back to the dressing room, structure to the pitch, and glimpses of a new identity. And in the summer of 2020, he delivered something tangible: the FA Cup. Arsenal beat Manchester City in the semi-final, then Chelsea in the final, a reminder of what the club could be under his leadership. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't consistent, but it was progress. Arsenal had finally found a direction again. From the chaos of lockdown, Arteta's vision slowly began to take shape. He wasn't just rebuilding Arsenal on the pitch, he was reshaping its culture off it. His methods were unconventional, sometimes even mocked, but they revealed a manager who would do anything to inspire his team. Before one match, he brought a light bulb into the dressing room, using it as a metaphor for energy and connection. Ahead of a trip to Anfield, he blasted "You'll Never Walk Alone" through the speakers at training, trying to prepare his players for the hostility of Liverpool's crowd. These ideas were ridiculed by critics as cringe, but for Arteta, they weren't gimmicks. They were tools to build belief, unity, and resilience. At the same time, he laid down his non-negotiables. Discipline and commitment came before everything. No one was bigger than the team. Mesut Ozil, once Arsenal's star playmaker, was frozen out. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, the club captain and top scorer, was stripped of the armband and eventually shown the door. These were bold, controversial calls, but they sent a clear message. Arsenal would be built on culture first, talent second. And in their place, Arteta put his trust in youth. Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli were given the stage to shine. Emile Smith-Rowe became a key figure. Martin Odegaard arrived and grew into a leader. William Saliba finally established himself as a cornerstone of the defense. Around them, smart signings were added. Thomas Partey for steel, Ben White and Alexander Zinchenko for flexibility, Gabriel Jesus for experience, and later Declan Rice for leadership. The result was a new kind of Arsenal. Young, hungry, disciplined, a team that reflected not just a manager's tactics, but his personality. Brick by brick, Arteta was building something bigger than a squad. He was building an identity. And for the first time in years, Arsenal weren't a joke. They were contenders again. Arsenal's rise under Arteta was undeniable. They were no longer the laughingstock of English football. They were title challengers again. The Emirates, once half empty and restless, was alive with belief. Songs echoed through North London. And for the first time in over a decade, Arsenal fans dared to dream. But with hope came heartbreak. In the 2022-23 season, Arsenal led the Premier League table for 248 days, longer than any runner-up in history. They played dazzling football, won hearts across the league, and looked destined to end their long title drought. Yet when the pressure mounted, they stumbled. Draws against West Ham and Southampton, a crushing defeat at the Etihad. All the momentum vanished. Manchester City, relentless and ruthless, swept past them to claim another title. The following season, they went again, stronger, sharper, more experienced. But when the finish line came into sight, the same story unfolded. Arsenal faltered, City surged, and once again, they had to settle for second place. And in 24-25, history repeated itself for a third time. Another season of promise, another fight to the very end, another runner-up medal, 3 consecutive second-place finishes, each one more painful than the last. Arsenal weren't outsiders anymore. They were the closest challengers to the Premier League, but they still couldn't take the final step. Europe brought no comfort either, with a limp Champions League exit exposing their inexperience on the biggest stage. For all the progress, the reality was harsh. This was a team that looked like champions until it mattered most. Critics began to circle. Arsenal were praised for their beautiful football, but questioned for their mentality. Could they handle the pressure of a title race? Could they find that ruthless edge when everything was on the line? To many, they weren't champions. They were nearly men. For Arteta, the frustration was clear. His vision had taken Arsenal from banter to belief, from mid-table mediocrity to fighting for the crown. But football does not reward progress. It rewards silverware. And without a trophy, questions about Arsenal's mentality and about Arteta himself only grew louder. By the summer of 2025, Arsenal had come full circle. From banter club to serious contenders, from laughingstock to City's and Liverpool's closest rival. Arteta had rebuilt the culture, reshaped the squad, and restored pride to the Emirates. But with 3 consecutive second-place finishes, the mood had shifted. Progress alone was no longer enough. The fans still sang his name, but the chants were tinged with impatience. The Emirates was buzzing again, but it was also restless. Arsenal hadn't lifted the Premier League in over 2 decades. And in football, history doesn't remember the nearly men. It remembers the winners. At the same time, Arteta's Arsenal was constantly being compared to another giant on the rebuild, Manchester United. Under Erik ten Hag, United were chaotic, inconsistent, and ultimately saw the Dutchman sacked. But even in his turbulent reign, United lifted silverware almost every season, an FA Cup here, a Carabao Cup there. Arsenal, on the other hand, considered these years their best under Arteta, yet had nothing to show for it. It's a contrast that fueled debate. Was Arsenal's progress really progress if it wasn't backed by trophies? Or was United's ability to win cups just papering over the cracks of a flawed project? Even Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, long before Arteta's rise, once said in a press conference,
"Any cup competition can give you a trophy, but sometimes it's more of an ego thing for managers and clubs. We progress well enough and we perform well enough, the trophies will end up at the club again."
And that was Arteta's defense. Arsenal weren't chasing quick fixes. They were building something sustainable, something lasting. But patience has limits. Because for all the talk of long-term vision, the reality was simple. Arsenal was still falling short. And with Pep's City dominant, Arne Slot reloading Liverpool, and rivals strengthening all around them, the excuses were gone. The pressure was heavier than ever. For Arteta, this was no longer about progress. It was about delivery. From Wenger's departure to Arteta's arrival, from banter to belief, Arsenal's journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. The culture has been rebuilt, the squad reshaped. The Emirates is alive again. And yet, the ultimate prize still eludes them. 3 consecutive second-place finishes, painful Champions League exits, the constant shadow of Pep Guardiola, his old mentor, still standing in the way. Arsenal are closer than they've been in 2 decades. But close is not enough. The irony of Arteta's reign is clear. He has created an Arsenal in Guardiola's image, disciplined, ruthless, beautiful to watch. But until he surpasses the master, his project will always be judged incomplete. So here we are. The season ahead isn't just another campaign. For Arsenal and for Mikel Arteta, this is the moment of truth. Will this project finally deliver glory, or will history remember it as beautiful football that never crossed the finish line? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. This season will define everything. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Arsenal's story, check out the other documentaries on my channel. We've covered the rise and fall of football's biggest clubs and players. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more, and if you'd like to support the channel even further, consider becoming a member. Every bit of support helps keep these stories alive.